Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. I'm Nancy Hershatter. I'm one of 6 Sunday service coordinators. Please silence your phones if you have not done so already. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this morning. You are an essential part of our celebration today. Whether today is your first or 1000th Sunday in our midst, in person or online, we are stronger because you are with us. As we gather this morning, we respectfully acknowledge that our physical building is on the traditional land of the Pagussit people. Before we get started this morning, I invite you to greet your neighbors, either here or next to you, others joining you online, and say hello, introduce yourself to someone you've never met, or wave across the room at old friends. We have a few announcements before we begin. Thanks to everyone who made our auction such a success. Interfaith Service for Peace joined Reverend Tony and the faith communities of Clapboard Ridge Road for an Interfaith Thanksgiving service at 7 o'clock on Monday, November 20th. It's a week from tomorrow, at the First Congregational Church of Danbury, 164 Deer Hill Avenue in Danbury. Also, Chalice Circles are back. Yay. You can still join Reverend Tony and others in the minister's office for a time of deep reflection and sharing based on the monthly theme Reverend Tony is using for his Sunday messages at 7 p.m. on the third Tuesdays of the month, which is November 21st. Our mitten tree. It's almost time for our mitten tree in support of Interfaith AIDS Ministry of Danbury. Beginning November 19th, you can take home a paper mitten from our mitten tree. Each mitten has a gift request. After purchasing the gift, you will bring the gift back to the UU Congregation of Danbury. For more information, see your order of service, our weekly email newsletter, and the events calendar on our website at uudanbury.org for a complete list of events. And before we light the chalice, Marianne Culla has a brief word to say about Together Women Rise. Come to the mic. Come to the floor mic. You, like me, are soft-spoken, so you're going to need that mic. Okay. Good. Yeah.
Good morning. Is that better?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Most of you know what Dining for Women is about. It's been renamed Together Women Rise, and we're having our first meeting in a while. And we're going to be meeting this afternoon at Donna Lawrence's house at 3 o'clock. And if you need transportation, Ann Krieg can meet you here at 2:15. And we'll be talking about an effort to educate young women in Pakistan. So hope to see you there. We do have a good time with other women and talking and eating and drinking. So thank you again.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, our chalice lighting affirmation. We make this time and this place holy simply by being together with each other. And we begin by lighting the flaming chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Please join me in reciting the words to our chalice lighting affirmation, which will be on the screen. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life. Please rise in body and or spirit and join in singing our hymn of welcome, Come Thou Font of Every Blessing, which is number 126 in the Gray Hymnal. Words are also on the screen.
Let's say our children's affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. We care for the earth and each other. Today's story comes from my colleague Dawn Starr Saras-Borschelt. Once upon a time, there was a family. Maybe this family had not quite enough to eat. Or maybe they had just about enough. Or perhaps they had more than enough. You might not have been able to tell. They might not have been able to tell. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you have enough or not. It's hard to not want more or different things than what you have. In any case, this family came together one autumn day for a celebration, a feast, a time of gratitude. They gathered around a table. There was food. There was drink. And there were flowers to remind them of beauty. And then there was a call from a gate outside their door.
Hello, we're hungry and thirsty, and we see you have a feast. May we come in?
Well, the family didn't know at first how to answer. Who were these people at the gate? Was it safe to let these people in? Was there enough to share? Was there room? But they remembered that most of them had come to this family, to this celebration from someplace else. They remembered that even they who were at the table had not always been kind to each other. There had been times when they hurt each other. There were still times when they made each other sad or angry or afraid. There's no way to make life completely safe. They remembered times when others had shared with them, even when others might not have had enough of their own. They remembered when each new member of the family had been born, or come to stay, or married in. They remembered that they had always found a way to make room. And they remembered an old saying, when you have more than you need, it is better to build a longer table than a higher fence. We have enough, they said. We might have more than enough. We are many and strong, and we can hold a safe space in our home for all who come. And so they went out their door to the gate in the fence, and they opened the gate. They invited the people to come. And once they were inside, they pulled out another table and made space for the newcomers. They covered it with a cloth, and the newcomers set upon it a dish full of something fragrant and delicious, which was strange and wonderful to the family. Everybody shared, and there was enough. I want us to notice, and thank you to our lovely actors, yes. I want us to notice, though, that we heard only one part of that story. We heard the story of people who were in the family, in the house, ready to feast. We heard what they felt and what they thought about and what they did and why they did it. We didn't hear the story of the people at the gate wanting to come in. We don't know who they are or why they are there or what they bring to the table other than what the family in the house thought was strange and wonderful food. When you hear stories in the Thanksgiving season, you might think about whose stories they are and whose stories they aren't, and what other stories there are. And Thanksgiving is not the only time for thinking about those things. These are important questions whenever we tell stories. So ends this story. And I invite the children to come downstairs with me for our programs today. We'll sing This Little Light of Mine.
Good morning. My theme anyway for this month is generosity. Generosity begins in gratitude. We are grateful for abundant life, the abundant life we share here at the UU congregation of Danbury. We're grateful that we can acknowledge the false narrative of the first Thanksgiving in the American civic religion. And we're grateful for a more inclusive view of history that helps us find a way to healing the pain caused by past injustices. And that also helps us create a just and equitable future. Realizing that our attitude toward the earth has often been one of consumption, scarcity, and waste, we're grateful for a renewed sense of stewardship, trusting in the abundance of Earth's resources as we work to heal the planet and live more sustainably. We have at times faced our cultural and religious differences with fear and suspicion, and we're grateful for a growing curiosity and growing sense of interdependence, discovery, and that in facing both joys and challenges, we do better together than alone. As we enter a holiday season that has come to represent overeating and overconsumption, we're grateful for opportunities for moderation, a chance to spend time with loved ones, and reminders to support the locally owned businesses and artisans. Where we equate the fullness of life with our own personal rights and desires, we're grateful for Rebecca Harding Davis's reminder that all of us from birth to death are guests at a feast we did not spread. And part of the way we build loving community here each Sunday is to hold each other in our hearts and to share with one another what's in our hearts. By quietly coming forward and placing milestones in the bowl, or by briefly sharing milestones aloud, in which we get to learn a little bit about the markers and the joys and sorrows in the lives of those who are our friends and community. So I invite you, as you are so moved at this time, to first come forward and place silent milestones in the bowl. And when that has finished, we'll hear those who want to share briefly out loud.
Here's one story. Sorry, better? Okay, thanks for saying so. An excerpt from Bearing Witness to Multiple Stories by the editors of the Christian Century. Here is one story. On October 7th, terrorists from Gaza entered Israel, brutally massacred more than 1,300 people, most of them civilians, and abducted 200 more. The attacker was Hamas, an explicitly anti-Jewish organization that was founded to fight Israel's existence and has frequently employed violence to that end. Since the initial attack, Hamas, joined by Islamic Jihad in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, has fired thousands of rockets into Israel. Here's another story. The day of those attacks by Hamas, a group most Palestinians have opposed for years, the Israeli Defense Forces began bombing Gaza, blocking critical supplies from going in and planning a ground assault. Civilian casualties quickly reached the thousands, as Gaza's density and closed borders leave nowhere to hide or to run. Israel has blockaded Gaza for 16 years and occupied the West Bank, where illegal Israeli settlements keep expanding, for 56 years. Palestinians in both places have slim economic prospects and few legal rights. Their homes are bulldozed, their movements restricted, their children imprisoned for throwing rocks. Every conflict involves competing stories, but often one story clearly embodies far more truth than the other. Not in this case. Each of the two stories sketched out here is factually sound, historically informed, and morally compelling. Both stories are true, and they are heartbreaking and tragic. Both are stories of people who love the land and deserve to live there in peace. It is now time for our community offering. We are generous people, and through our generous giving, we help to sustain one another by making sure this congregation has what it needs to serve our members and our work in the community. If you're with us for the first time, your presence here is your gift to us. Members and friends, please express your generosity by using the link or QR code that's posted in the chat or projected on the screen. You may also mail a check to UUCD at 24 Clapper Ridge Road in Danbury. Thank you for doing your part to support and sustain this community we love. The music video is Salam by Moses
Salam, or Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, is a peace song by Moshe Ben Are, composed while he was in the band Shiva. It is sung in Hebrew and Arabic and has gained popularity in Israeli folk music and around the world as a youth anthem for peace. When performed, it typically begins slowly and somewhat plaintively, and as it repeats, gradually increases in tempo and excitement.
Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'alkuna. Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ojibo Shalom Aleinu, Ve'alkuna. Salam Aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Salam, salam, salam Aleinu ve'al ha'olam. Salam, salam. Oh, Yabo.
Each year, as we approach Thanksgiving, we are given yet another opportunity to adopt a generous or miserly view of our American history. This makes some of us grateful, with the sigh that it's about time, and it makes some of our fellow citizens completely unhinged and angry. I'm grateful that the uncritical and unthinking Thanksgiving Day pageants in the local elementary school, where happy little Indians and happy little pilgrims share food and go on and dance and sing songs together, are becoming history themselves. Reckoning with the National Day of Thanksgiving as simultaneously being a national day of mourning for Native people is actually good for us. It means our view of history is widening and expanding and allowing for more complexity and nuance, including allowing for multiple views of historical events. And this leads to deeper understanding. It allows us to view the world with a wider, more inclusive lens, and doing so helps us see our contemporary situation differently, and hopefully allows us to envision a broader, brighter, more inclusive future. A generous view of history underlies the increasing awareness among white Americans of the racism and white supremacy ideology that resides in the heart of this nation's social order and government, and thus its pervasive presence in all facets of American life: education and healthcare and housing, employment and labor practices and law enforcement and banking and the legal system. Only a willful ignorance, a deeply ingrained race-based hatred and prejudice, and an absurdly narrow view of history can keep anyone of goodwill from understanding the fullness of Black history as American history and why Black lives matter. When Iranian college students attacked and took over the American embassy in Tehran on November 4th, 1979, and kept 52 American hostages as part of the Islamic Revolution that toppled the then Iranian government. President Jimmy Carter said it was, quote, an act of blackmail. And the hostages, quote, victims of terrorism and anarchy. Americans were outraged. And this event was a contributing factor in Carter's landslide loss to Ronald Reagan in 1980. A narrow view of history makes it very easy to see the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 as evil Muslim terrorists defeating democracy and arbitrarily punishing innocent Americans at the embassy by keeping them hostages. A generous view of history does not excuse the hostage taking, nor does it excuse any wrongdoing by the Islamic revolutionaries in Iran at that time or since. But it helps us understand it a little better. In 1953, the CIA led a revolution that toppled a democratically elected government in Iran and used the excuse of that government being socialist to install a regime friendlier to America and its allies, especially England. And perhaps more importantly, although not said, British and American oil interests who wanted more control of Iranian oil. In the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks, many Americans asked with genuine bewilderment, why do they hate us? America responded to the attacks by waging war in Iraq under false pretenses, passing the Patriot Act, limiting our civil liberties, and villainized Islam and Muslims. A generous view of history might have helped us better respond to that terrorist attack without excusing the terrorism and mass murder. A generous view of history helps us understand that the 9/11 terrorists, like many other people around the world, viewed, and still do, the United States of America as a global power that preaches democracy, but practices oppressive colonialism around the world wherever it benefits American economic interests. The current state of affairs in the Middle East cannot be understood without a generous view of history. A narrow and constricted view of history makes it easy to frame the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a good versus evil scenario with who is good and who is evil obscured by which side you're on. A generous view of history looks with a difficult but broad lens. It sees the oppression, villainization, and attempted extermination of Jewish people had a long historic record, hundreds and hundreds of years before the Holocaust. Given this history, whether you are Zionist or not, it is completely understandable and logical for people to want a Jewish state, to claw at and beg for other people to understand wanting that level of safety. It makes sense that, like any other state, that state would want to defend itself when attacked. It's also logical that any people who were displaced by carving out a political entity where there previously was not one would be inconvenienced, at least, by that process. It's understandable that those people would feel threatened and want to defend themselves. It's understandable that a generous view of history views the past with a broad enough lens to include various perspectives, especially those that have been passed over or ignored. A generous view of history can validate multiple, although not all possible, narratives of the same events. This is not to justify or forgive terrorism. The terrorism of Hamas or ISIS or the 9/11 hijackers is wrong, and it is evil because terrorism is wrong and evil. It is also not to justify the apartheid and other human rights violations of the government of Israel, according to the United Nations, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch, among others. Because apartheid and human rights violations are also wrong and evil. We do not excuse wrongdoing and evil, but the better we understand it, perhaps it gives us just a little bit better a chance of doing something about it. To understand it means to understand where it comes from, how it was caused, how it spreads and multiplies. Because only with that kind of deep understanding can we ever hope to eventually find peaceful solutions. In the wake of the Watts riots and other rioting in America connected with civil rights protests in the 60s, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about the need to understand where that violence came from. Not to condone it, but to put it in its context. When placed in context, there can be understanding. This is something Dr. King is famously quoted about when he said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." King condemned the riots. He believed riots, like other expressions of violence, were both unethical as well as impractical in terms of achieving the ends of the movement. He believed that the revolution to bring about the beloved community cannot be fought with guns and death and violence and terror, because ends and means must cohere and work together. He knew that a violent struggle for liberation would only empower those opposed to radical equality to become more brutal in their defense of the entrenched status quo. So he vehemently condemned the riots. But while he did so, he also said, "It is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn the riots." I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear, he said. It has failed to hear the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years, has failed to hear that the promise of freedom and justice have not been met. It has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than they are about justice, equality, and a common humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summer of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. As long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. Stanford University, April 1967. Now take King's words and substitute terrorism for riots, and the world for America. Some terrorism is a calculated tactic of war, fear, and violence. Some is a scheme to sow discord, division, and fear. And some, what percentage or part, I don't know, but some must also arise from being unheard. The language of the world's unheard, falling on the deaf ears of the wealthy and the powerful who care more about maintaining the status quo of their wealth and their power and their privilege and their colonial control than they do about equity, justice, and human rights. Terrorism is not justified, as riots are not justified. But a generous view of history gives us a deeper understanding of where they come from Having a deeper understanding does not automatically lead to a wisdom or compassion that will prevent it in the future. But perhaps it can lead to not using violence as a solution someday. Perhaps it might lead one day a better understanding to finding a better approach to solving long ingrained suspicions and mistrust and hatreds. The most difficult step in adopting a generous view of history is entertaining the possibility that your perspective just might be wrong. It might not be correct or complete. And this leads to considering that what you've been told and taught and taken for granted about the world might not be correct or complete. That's frightening. At the very least, it requires consideration that everything is more complex and more multifaceted than you've been aware of or willing to recognize. More complex and multifaceted than the world has been aware of or willing to recognize, sometimes for a very long time. The American civil religion ritual of Thanksgiving we passed on through the generations comes from a narrow and limited view of history. It celebrates the friendship and cooperation between European colonizers and Native Americans, but leaves out smallpox blankets and broken treaties and stolen land and genocide. Each year in Breeds Hill, outside Plymouth, Massachusetts, Native people have conducted a National Day of Mourning observance since 1971. Thanksgiving, as it was handed down to us, perhaps isn't something to celebrate in the way we've been told. We're gaining an increasingly stronger awareness of this. And yet, there is something that rings true about giving thanks. There is something that rings true about celebrating bounty and the end of harvest season. There is something that rings true and ancient about feasting with family and friends, and acknowledging the blessings and benefits of family, friends, and community. Throughout human history, people from all over the world, from various cultures and various religious traditions, have constructed and enacted ritual and ceremony built around sacred meals, often with special traditions of food and drink. The Christian celebration of communion, or Eucharist, which literally means Thanksgiving, is such a meal, as is the Jewish Passover dinner, as is Iftar, the meal with which Muslims break the fast each day of Ramadan. Zen monks practice oryoki, a mindful ritual way of eating and having their meals. In the Hindu tradition, sweets play a role in Diwali. Krishna's birthday is celebrated with an offering of 56 different food items. 56! Makes your Thanksgiving potluck nothing by comparison. Many of you will share a meal with family and friends a week from Thursday. For this event, I offer you a brief ritual and grace, or Thanksgiving before a meal, that focuses on two feature foods or beverages, one native to the Americas and one known to the Europeans at the time of colonization, and combines it with a prayer for inclusion. There's a handout in your order of service. Part of that handout is a list of common New World foods that were known to the native peoples at the time of colonization. The other column is a list of Old World foods that were known and widely eaten and grown and harvested by Europeans at the time of colonization. There is a lovely ritual that involves a sharing of cornbread and cider, mixing of these elements. But we have some food allergies in our community. So instead of doing it here, where people may be negatively impacted and really harmed, I want to empower you all to do this ritual at home with your family and friends, if you so choose. You can substitute the foods you would like to use when and if you do this yourself. And so there's a little script above the list of foods that you can share with those with whom you gather for Thanksgiving. We gather today as privileged, imperfect inheritors of an imperfect American history, but part of the long history of humanity that has celebrated ritual meals and given thanks for having food and drink and shelter and family and friends in a supportive community. And so we give thanks. We give thanks for enough to eat and drink, and a place to live, and family and friends with whom to share our lives. We give thanks with foods that come from both the old world, such as apple cider, and the new world, such as cornbread, in the hope that the division and pain caused by colonization and genocide and war are replaced by unity and cooperation and mutuality, the way all these different foods combine to make a Thanksgiving meal. And so one with the earth, one with the spirit of life, one with each other, and one with all kind and compassionate, peace-loving people in the world. We share this meal as a living symbol of the community we share with each other and the beloved community we wish to create in this world. Amen. Our hymn of celebration is number 128 in the gray hymnal, For All That Is Our Life, and the words are also on the screen.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build a common good and make our own days glad.
Please join me in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Gelati. This past Saturday, November 11th, the nation celebrated Veterans Day. On or close to Veterans Day, over the past several years, we have taken the time here on Sunday morning at UUCD to remember all United States military veterans. Veterans Day is especially important to me, not personally, not for myself, but for veterans who have suffered a great deal over the many decades in the past, including the most important veteran in my life, which was my father. My father survived the Battle of the Bulge. For some of you who don't know what that means, that was considered the worst battle between two armies in the history of the world. There's never been any battle any worse than that. 800 Americans a day were killed for 45 days, almost double that injured. And my father survived that to come back home to his wife and newborn baby. But in many ways, he never really survived it. He had terrible struggles over the years. Veterans Day, as we know it today, was established on June 1st, 1954, by President Dwight Eisenhower. This day is to honor all past and present military veterans in the Army, the Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. Veterans Day is an important holiday to be celebrated each year because it allows us to give thanks to men and women who served in the military to protect our nation. These soldiers served in times of peace and war, protecting the safety and security of citizens of our country and around the world. By recognizing and honoring these veterans, we allow generations of families and friends to understand, appreciate, and have a small glimpse into the sacrifice these men and women have given to the United States. Currently, there are around 19 million veterans in the U.S. Four-star General Mark Milley served as the 20th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the nation's highest-ranking military officer. All the other chiefs of staff, generals, and admirals report to Mark Milley. Mark Milley reports directly to the president. After serving 40 years, the following are excerpts from an impassioned speech General Mark Milley gave during his retirement ceremony, September 29th of this past year. Quote, "The blood we spill pay our freedom of speech. Our blood pays for the right to assemble, or due process, or freedom of speech, our right to vote, and all the other rights and privileges that come with being an American. Sometimes we forget the cost we have paid in the past for our freedom, liberties, and the Constitution of the United States. If we're willing to die for that document, if we're willing to deploy to combat, if we're willing to lose an arm, a leg, or an eye to protect and support and defend that document and protect the American people, we are willing to live for it too. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen, or to a tyrant or a dictator. We don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to any individual. We take an oath to the Constitution of the United States. We take an oath to the idea that America, and we're willing to protect it. Every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Guardian, and Coast Guardsman, each of us commit our very lives to protecting and defending the Constitution, regardless of personal price, and we are not easily intimidated. End of quote. A final note. We often fail to recognize and give credit to the families of military personnel. When enlisted troops are deployed overseas and families are left behind to fend for themselves, they often experience grave financial hardships. These forgotten families many times find themselves without enough money to survive and meet basic needs. Let us not forget the military families and children left behind and the day-to-day difficulties they're forced to endure. I'm going to ask everyone, if you're willing and able, to stand, please. If you put your right hand over your heart. Please remain standing. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That's the end of our service.